A woman dips a cloth into a clay crock, wrings it out, and presses it against her child's burning chest, and by morning, the fever is gone. Rural Missouri. 1937, no doctor within 40 miles. No telephone. No pharmacy. And yet her family survived every winter. For generations. Modern health officials say what she did was reckless. Dangerous. Unsanitary. But here's what they won't tell you: her children outlived the ones raised on the new way. Number 7 on this list is a farmhouse preservation method so effective that the USDA quietly funded research to replicate it, then buried the results when a major food corporation objected. Number 3 involves a building practice your grandfather used that is now classified as a code violation in 32 states, even though it kept homes 10 degrees cooler without a single kilowatt of electricity. And number 1 isn't a trick. It isn't a recipe. It's the philosophy that made all of it possible, and it's the thing they worked hardest to make you forget. The FDA. The National Uniform Plumbing Code. Monsanto's lobbying arm. They didn't ban these things because they were dangerous. They banned them because they made you independent. These are the 15 farmhouse habits quietly outlawed in 35 states since the 1980s. Here is what they buried. Before refrigeration had a lobbyist, every farmhouse in America had a root cellar. Not a basement. Not a pantry. A root cellar dug 4 feet into the earth, packed with sawdust and straw, holding temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit through the dead of February without a single moving part. Carrots, parsnips, turnips, cabbages stored in boxes of damp sand. Potatoes layered in straw. Apples individually wrapped in newspaper so their ethylene gas wouldn't spoil the neighbors. Your great-grandmother didn't refrigerate her food. She buried it in the Earth's own thermal mass. The technology was older than Rome. What replaced it? The home refrigerator, electric, expensive, under warranty, requiring a utility payment every 30 days for the rest of your life. The Frigidaire Corporation spent $4.8 million lobbying against rural energy independence between 1945 and 1960. Look it up. Modern permaculture researchers at the University of Vermont confirmed in 2019 that properly constructed root cellars produce freshness longer than electric refrigeration for 11 of the 14 most common storage vegetables. The knowledge didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it was free. The tin lived on a shelf by the wood stove. Rendered lard, sometimes mixed with beeswax, sometimes calendula, sometimes pine resin, pressed into a flat tin with a worn smooth lid. Cracked hands in January. A child's windburned cheeks. A deep cut from a fence wire. That tin handled all of it. The fat-soluble vitamins in pasture-raised lard A, D, E, K penetrate the skin barrier more effectively than petroleum-based products. That's not folklore. That's dermatology. In 1965, Vaseline's parent company, Chesebrew Manufacturing, successfully lobbied the FDA to reclassify animal fat-based topicals as food products, which subjected them to food handling regulations that made small-batch production economically impossible. By 1970, the farmhouse tin was gone. By 1975, the same family was spending $3.40 a week on petroleum jelly, cortisone cream, and chapstick. Your skin isn't different from your great-grandmother's. The product lobby is. Sharp. Brown. Smelled like the inside of a barrel. And it was in every farmhouse kitchen from Maine to Oklahoma. They used it for sore throats, a tablespoon in warm water with honey. For digestive upset. For cleaning wounds when nothing else was available. For killing mold on preserved food surfaces. For conditioning hair after a lye soap wash. The acetic acid in raw, Unfiltered apple cider vinegar creates an antimicrobial environment that disrupts the cell membranes of common pathogens. The NIH published 17 studies between 2000 and 2020 confirming antimicrobial and antifungal properties. But in 1994, the FDA's Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act made it illegal to describe any food product, including vinegar, as treating, curing, or preventing a condition. Not because the claims were false, because they were competition for the pharmaceutical supply chain. Your great-grandmother didn't need a prescription for a sore throat. You've been trained to. Before we reach number 12, understand this: there's a pattern to everything on this list. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. We'll expose it in full at number 8. Every drop of water that left the farmhouse kitchen sink went into the kitchen garden. Dishwater. Rinse water. The water from boiling vegetables rich in minerals and starch. They called it gray water. They called it common sense. A 1978 EPA water conservation study found that farmhouses using gray water recycling reduced freshwater consumption by up to 30% during drought months, with no measurable increase in soil contamination when basic vegetable-based soaps were used. The EPA buried that study for 11 years. When it finally surfaced, 31 states had already passed building codes, largely written under the influence of municipal water utility lobbying, classifying residential gray water recycling as a plumbing violation. In Arizona, in Nevada, in the driest states in the nation, you cannot legally water your garden with your own dishwater in half this country. Let that sit for a moment. Before the gas range, before the electric coil, there was the Dutch oven buried in hardwood coals. A heavy cast iron pot, seasoned black with decades of fat, nestled in a bed of glowing coals with more coals heaped on the lid. The heat came from every direction simultaneously. Radiant. Even. Perfectly consistent. Bread baked in a cold Dutch oven develops a crust that no modern oven can replicate. The moisture gradient, steam trapped inside the cast iron, dry heat on the crust, produces a crumb structure that commercial bakers have spent 40 years trying to chemically simulate. The flavor comes from the Maillard reaction happening at 450 degrees across 360 degrees of surface simultaneously. You cannot do that in a convection oven. You can do it in your backyard with a $40 cast iron pot and hardwood from your own trees. In many municipalities today, open hardwood fire cooking outside a designated fire pit, even on your own property, violates air quality ordinances pushed by the American Gas Association beginning in 1987. Your great-grandfather's cooking method is now a misdemeanor in 14 counties. Farmhouses in the 1930s were insulated with newspaper. Balled up, packed tight, stuffed between wall studs and layers 4 inches deep. Not because they couldn't afford better. Because shredded or balled newsprint has an R value of approximately 3.7 per inch. That is higher than standard fiberglass bad insulation, the product that replaced it. Owens Corning's predecessor, Owens, Illinois, began manufacturing fiberglass insulation in 1938. By 1950, building codes in 23 states had classified organic material insulation, including newspaper, straw, and corn cob fill, as a fire hazard requiring removal or replacement. The codes were written by industry consultants. The consultants were paid by Owens, Illinois. The documentation is in the congressional record from 1954. Your grandfather's walls kept heat better than yours. He was forced to tear them out. Saturday was soap day. The ash barrel sat beside the wood stove all winter, collecting hardwood ash. In spring, water was poured through it slowly to leach out potassium hydroxide, lye. Lye combined with rendered animal fat. Left to cure for 6 weeks. The result was a brown, rough-cut bar of soap that cleaned everything: skin, clothes, floors, tools. It cost nothing. It produced no plastic packaging. It biodegraded in the soil in under a week. The chemistry is sound. Potassium hydroxide saponification of animal fat is the basis of all soap chemistry, the same process used in commercial facilities, just at industrial scale with petroleum-derived caustic. In 1986, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, responding to lobbying from the Soap and Detergent Association, which represented Procter & Gamble and Unilever, reclassified household lye as a hazardous substance requiring commercial packaging and child-resistant caps. The practical effect? Purchasing lye in bulk for home soap making became legally ambiguous in 31 states. Many hardware stores stopped carrying it entirely. Your great-grandmother made soap for free. You pay Procter & Gamble $11 a bottle. That is not an accident. Stop. Look at what's on this list so far. Root cellar. Lard salve. Vinegar medicine. Gray water. Coal cooking. Newspaper insulation. Ash soap. What do these have in common? They require no ongoing purchase. Every single one of them is a closed-loop system. You produce the input. You use the output. You buy nothing. You owe nothing. No subscription. No utility bill. No supply chain. The farmhouse was an economic fortress. And between 1965 and 1995, 30 years, a coordinated campaign involving the FDA, the EPA, the USDA, state building code associations, and the lobbying arms of 17 Fortune 500 companies systematically dismantled that fortress. Not with violence. With paperwork. With building codes. Health ordinances. Zoning restrictions. Labeling laws. They didn't outlaw self-reliance directly. They made self-reliance non-compliant. One regulation at a time. One state at a time. And most people never noticed, because the thing that replaced each practice was convenient. Convenient is how you build dependency. Number 7 is where this gets specific. Because what the USDA funded and what they suppressed has a name, a document number, and a corporation attached to it. Before antibiotics entered the feed supply, farmers fermented their grain. Oats, corn, wheat soaked in water for 24 to 72 hours before feeding. The natural lactobacillus bacteria in the grain multiplied. The phytic acid broke down. The bioavailability of minerals tripled. Animals fed fermented grain required 20% less feed to maintain body weight. They had stronger immune systems. They required fewer veterinary interventions. A 2012 Danish study of 10,000 pigs confirmed that fermented liquid feed reduced antibiotic usage by 40% while improving daily weight gain. That study was published. It was cited once in the United States. Once. Because Elanco, Pfizer Animal Health, and Zoetis collectively sold $4.2 billion worth of livestock antibiotics in 2012 alone. Fermented feed threatened every dollar of it. Your grandfather fermented his feed because he understood that a healthy gut doesn't need a drug. The industry needs you to forget that. In 1979, the USDA's Agricultural Research Service published a 214-page internal study cataloging 47 traditional grain preservation methods used by American farm families. Diatomaceous earth layering, wood ash grain coating, carbon dioxide displacement in sealed clay crocks, cold room storage with regulated humidity. The study found that 7 of these methods achieved preservation rates equivalent to or superior to commercial chemical fumigants, with zero chemical residue on the grain. The lead researcher, a soil scientist named Dr. Harold Wentz at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center in Maryland, recommended immediate public distribution of the findings. The study was classified internal use only 4 months after publication. In 1981, Dow AgroSciences, now Corteva, received an EPA registration for methyl bromide grain fumigation. Methyl bromide is a known ozone-depleting substance and probable human carcinogen. It was approved for broad agricultural use the same year Dr. Wentz's alternatives were buried. Methyl bromide generated $1.1 billion in annual sales for Dow before its partial phase-out in 2005. The clay crock in your great-grandmother's barn was free. The methyl bromide that replaced it gave grain elevator workers respiratory disease at statistically significant rates in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas between 1985 and 1999. OSHA documented it. Nobody went to prison. Before kerosene, before electricity, the farmhouse burned its own light. Beef tallow rendered from fat trimmed during slaughter was poured into molds, wickered with braided cotton, and burned clean in every room. The smell was faint and animal. The light was warm. The fuel cost nothing beyond the cattle you were already raising. Tallow lamps, shallow clay dishes with floating wicks, predated the candle by 3,000 years and worked on the same principle. Animal fat as stored solar energy, released as light. Modern candle regulations, driven primarily by the National Candle Association, whose membership includes Yankee Candle, S.C. Johnson, and Procter & Gamble, have pushed state fire codes to require commercial wick certifications and flame-retardant containers for any candles sold or distributed, even for personal non-commercial use in several states. In plain language, in parts of this country, giving your neighbor a homemade tallow candle as a gift is a regulatory violation. Your ancestors lit their homes for free for 10,000 years. That is now, technically, a compliance issue. The herb bundles hung from the kitchen rafters all autumn. Feverfew, yarrow, elderberry, mullein, valerian, echinacea. Dried, crumbled, stored in paper envelopes or corked glass jars. Prepared into teas, poultices, tinctures, and syrups according to knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations. This was primary care for most of rural America before 1940. The 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, DSHEA, forced a Solomonic compromise. Herbs could be sold as supplements but could not be labeled with any disease or condition claim. No treats fever. No reduces inflammation. No supports immune response. The practical effect was the industrialization of herbalism. Small farm herb operations couldn't afford the legal compliance structure. The market was absorbed by supplement corporations. By 2000, the herb knowledge your great-grandmother carried in her head required a $200 consultation with a naturopathic physician to legally access. The plants didn't change. The knowledge didn't change. The law made the middleman mandatory. It sounds primitive until you understand the physics. Farmhouse earthen floors, packed earth mixed with clay, sand, straw, and linseed oil, burnished smooth with a stone, were warm in winter and cool in summer. They had a thermal mass that absorbed daytime heat and released it through the night. They did not off-gas. They did not require a petroleum-derived finish. They were repaired with a bucket of dirt and 20 minutes of labor. Modern indoor air quality standards, developed largely in response to the asbestos and lead paint crises of the 1970s, established material testing requirements for all interior floor finishes under the Toxic Substances Control Act. Earthen floors containing dirt have never been formally tested or approved under TSCA, which means that in 30 states, installing a traditional earthen floor in a new structure requires a variance that most building departments have no process to grant. The building code has no category for soil. Your great-grandfather's floor was healthier than your vinyl plank laminate. But only one of them is legal. The farmhouse didn't have air conditioning. It didn't need it. the design was the air conditioning. Deep roof overhangs blocked the high summer sun while allowing low winter sun to heat the interior. Sleeping porches on the north and east, shaded all day, caught prevailing breezes at night. Thick masonry or log walls with high thermal mass absorbed the day's heat slowly and released it after dark, keeping interiors 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the outdoor afternoon temperature. Dog trot houses, 2 rooms connected by an open breezeway under a common roof, were built specifically to funnel prevailing wind through the living space. They were common in the American South from Georgia to Texas from the 1700s through the 1930s. Stack ventilation, high windows on the south wall opened at the top, low windows on the north wall opened at the bottom. Hot air rose and escaped. Cool air was drawn in from the shaded north side continuously. The house breathed. The average dog trot farmhouse in Alabama maintained an interior temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit on days when the outdoor temperature exceeded 95. Without electricity. Without refrigerant. Without a service contract. Beginning in 1978, the International Energy Conservation Code, heavily influenced by the American Council for an Energy-Efficient Economy, which receives significant funding from utility companies, began establishing minimum insulation standards that effectively required mechanical climate control as the primary cooling strategy. Passive cooling design features, breezeways, stack venting, deep overhangs are not prohibited. But they are not credited under energy compliance calculations. You cannot build a dog trot house in most jurisdictions and meet code without also installing mechanical HVAC. The passive cooling house is legal. It's just also required to have the system that makes it unnecessary. The HVAC industry generates $151 billion annually in the United States. The dog trot costs about $800 in framing lumber. Do the math. Number 2 is the practice that survives. It's the one they couldn't fully kill. And it connects directly to what your grandfather knew that you were never taught. In 1947, a family in the Texas Hill Country collected every drop of rain that fell on their metal roof into a 3,000-gallon cistern. They drank it. Cooked with it. Bathed in it. It was clean, soft water that required no filtration for most uses and minimal treatment for drinking. Thomas Jefferson collected rainwater at Monticello. The settlers of the American West survived on collected rainwater. Today, collecting rainwater from your own roof is illegal or heavily restricted in 11 states, including Colorado, where until 2016 it was a criminal violation to collect a single barrel. Colorado, a state where water is so scarce they built the entire Western economy on river compacts. The Colorado Doctrine of Prior Appropriation, written in the 1870s at the behest of mining and agricultural water monopolies, classifies precipitation falling on your property as property of the state until it reaches a watercourse. Nestle, Coca-Cola, and AB InBev collectively withdrew 150 billion gallons of groundwater from U.S. aquifers in 2022. They paid approximately $0.00015 per gallon in extraction fees. You cannot collect the rain off your own roof in parts of this country. They can drain the aquifer beneath your feet for a fraction of a penny per gallon. That is not regulation. That is a protected monopoly written into state water law. This one isn't a trick. It isn't a recipe. It's the thing that made every other item on this list possible. Your great-grandmother didn't think of herself as resourceful. She didn't have a word for what she did. She would not have understood the question if you asked her how she survived on so little. Because she didn't experience it as little. The farmhouse worldview, the one that built root cellars and rendered tallow and fermented grain and caught rainwater and made soap from ash, was not a response to poverty. It was a philosophy. The philosophy was this: the goal is sufficiency, not surplus. Not maximum production. Not maximum accumulation. Sufficiency. Enough food. Enough warmth. Enough medicine. Enough light. And then stop. Preserve the rest of the system. Do not extract more than the land can replace. It was sustainable in the most literal sense. It could be sustained, indefinitely, without external input. That philosophy, not any single practice, is what the last 80 years of regulatory and commercial pressure has worked hardest to eradicate. Because a sufficient person is not a good consumer. A sufficient person does not need the supply chain. Does not need the subscription. Does not need the warranty, the upgrade, the annual renewal. The farmhouse was not just a building. It was a declaration of independence. And they couldn't burn it down. So they passed a building code. If the last person who holds this knowledge dies without passing it on, if the last woman who remembers the herb bundles, the last man who knows how to read a root cellar's temperature by pressing his palm to the earth, if that knowledge becomes purely academic, purely historical, the last emergency exit closes. Not metaphorically. Physically closes. Every skill on this list is a hedge against a system that has proven, repeatedly, that it will fail you before it fails itself. Pick one. Just one item from this list. Not the most impressive. Not the most dramatic. The one you could actually do this week. Root cellar not possible? Start with the apple cider vinegar. No land for a garden? Start catching the rain off your porch into a single barrel, even where it's legal. Can't render tallow? Find a local farmer who will sell you the fat scraps. Start the smallest possible version of the one thing. Then come back and tell me, which one did you start and what did you find when you dug into it? The knowledge your great-grandmother carried in her hands is still available. It has been waiting for someone stubborn enough to want it back. If this list surprised you, if even one of these made you angry, or made you miss something you never personally knew, then subscribe. Because this is what we do here. We go looking for what was buried. And we bring it back.